In the aftermath of World War II, as nuclear arms began to proliferate, security protocols around them quickly developed. Broken arrow is the U.S. military term for an accident involving nuclear weapons or nuclear components that results in a serious consequence such as the loss, accidental non-nuclear detonation, radioactive contamination, or jettisoning of a bomb. Join me today as I begin a series on the broken arrow events acknowledged by the U.S. government.
We got ourselves a broken arrow.
Broken what? That's what we call it when we lose a nuclear weapon. I don't know what's scarier, losing nuclear weapons, or that it happens so often there's actually a term for it.
After the war in Europe ended with Germany's surrender in May of 1945, the war in the Pacific still raged on. The Allies' island-hopping campaign was slowly cutting off Japan, yet planners still feared an invasion of the home islands. The plan for Operation Downfall, the invasion of the Japanese home islands, was broken into two parts. The invasion of Kyushu, codename Olympic, followed by the invasion of Honshu, codenamed Coronet. By June 1945, the Allies had taken Okinawa. Operation Olympic, planned for November of 1945, would launch from Okinawa, hitting 35 separate beaches on 3 different points in Kyushu. The troops would then drive inland until approximately 1/3 of the island was secured. The attack would then switch into a defense and occupation. The occupied portions of Kyushu would be used as a new base of operations for air attacks across all of Japan and a base to launch the main Allied offensive on Tokyo. The invasion of Honshu, codenamed Coronet, would have been even bigger than the initial invasion. Tentatively scheduled to begin March 1st of 1946, Operation Coronet called for using 40 divisions from the United States, the United Kingdom, and Commonwealth forces to launch from occupied Kyushu and land at 2 points on the Kanto Plain surrounding Tokyo, on the Bansu Peninsula, and on Sagami Bay. For scale, the initial D-Day landings involved 156,000 troops, 73,000 American, 83,000 British, 15,000 Canadians, plus 23,000 airborne. Plans for Operation Downfall called for an initial assault force of roughly 766,000 troops. By the end of August 1944, around 2.1 million troops were deployed to France for Operation Overlord, 420,000 combat troops, with the rest filling naval, air, and logistics roles. The estimates for total forces required for Operation Coronet range from 5 to 7 million. Japanese defense plans, Operation Ketsugo, called for up to 3 million troops in sacrificial coastal defenses. War Department studies warned of 5 to 10 million Japanese military and civilians killed, and as many as 3 to 4 million U.S. casualties in an all-out invasion. In preparation for the invasion, the U.S. ordered around 1 million Purple Hearts. Because Operation Downfall never happened, every Purple Heart awarded through the Korean War, Vietnam, the First Gulf War, and the early parts of the global war on terror came from the World War II stockpiles. The U.S. didn't replenish Purple Heart medals until the early 2000s. From 1942 to 1946, the Manhattan Project, the U.S.-led effort to build the first atomic bombs, mobilized more than 130,000 people across dozens of sites. In May of 1945, the project achieved its goals. The Trinity test at Alamogordo, New Mexico. On the 16th of July, they detonated the world's first nuclear device. 3 weeks later, President Truman ordered the bombs used against Japan. On August 6, 1945, the B-29 Enola Gay dropped a bomb called Little Boy on Hiroshima, instantly destroying 70% of the city and killing an estimated 66,000 people and injuring another 69,000 more.
A short time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed its usefulness to the enemy. That bomb has more power than 20,000 tons of TNT.
The April 1945 bombing survey later revised Hiroshima's death toll to nearly 140,000 people. 3 days later, on August 9th, Fat Man dropped by B-29 boxcar leveled almost half of Nagasaki, killing 35 to 40,000 people. Thousands in both cities later died of burns and radiation sickness. By mid-August, Japan had surrendered unconditionally. Based on U.S. and Japanese planners' casualty estimates, the atomic bombs likely spared the lives of millions on both sides. After World War II, the American nuclear monopoly didn't last long. In the Soviet Union, Stalin had directed a crash program to develop atomic weapons. Soviet spies supplied vital design details, and by August of 1949, the USSR had secretly detonated its first bomb in Kazakhstan. American sensors picked up the blast in early September, shocking U.S. leaders. The Soviet test ended the U.S. monopoly and marked the opening of the nuclear arms race, dramatically accelerating the Cold War. As nuclear arms proliferated, the security protocols surrounding them quickly solidified. A broken arrow is the U.S. military term for an accident involving a nuclear weapon or nuclear component that results in serious consequences such as loss, accidental non-nuclear detonation, for example, the conventional high explosives and the weapon detonating, radioactive contamination, or the jettisoning of a weapon. Importantly, the term broken arrow is used for severe incidents that did not create the risk of an outbreak of nuclear war. Incidents that are grave and not the type that can be mistaken for a hostile nuclear attack. A related classification is bent spear. Bent spear refers to significant incidents involving nuclear weapons or components that raise safety, security, or procedural concerns but do not meet the threshold for a broken arrow. Examples of bent spear include mishandling, structural damage, security lapses, and other problems that could compromise the safety or the weapon's security, but where there's no loss, detonation, or major contamination. Bent spear incidents require investigation and corrective action, but are considered less severe than broken arrows. Most broken arrow events in the 1950s to 1980s took place during long-range ferry flights and Strategic Air Command's continuous Chrome Dome airborne alerts. These incidents highlighted the ever-present dangers of handling nuclear weapons. In 1950, the world teetered on a knife's edge of nuclear war. Just months earlier, in August 1949, the Soviet Union had detonated its first atomic bomb. The United States responded by stockpiling weapons and solidifying Western alliances. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, was founded in 1949 to counter Soviet expansion. By early 1950, the U.S. inventory numbered in the hundreds of nuclear bombs, vastly outpacing the tiny Soviet arsenal. Against this backdrop of fear and rivalry, every nuclear-capable flight carried an enormous risk and significance. Into this charged environment flew the Convair B-36 Peacemaker, the Air Force's giant new long-range bomber. With 6 massive piston engines and later variants sporting 4 jet engine boosters, with a wingspan of 230 feet, the B-36 was a marvel of its era. By 1950, some 325 B-36s formed the core of Strategic Air Command's deterrent force. On February 13, 1950, one such aircraft, B-36B model, serial number 4492075, from the 7th Bombardment Wing at Carswell Air Force Base in Texas, lifted off on a routine training flight. It carried a full crew of 16 airmen plus a specially trained weaponeer whose job it was to handle the atomic bomb on board. High above the frozen landscape of Alaska, the Peacemaker headed south on a 24-hour simulated combat sortie. The flight plan was audacious. From Eielson Air Force Base in Fairbanks, Alaska, out over the northern Pacific, then inland over Washington and Montana, a mock bombing run over Southern California, and then over San Francisco, standing in for a Soviet city, before its final leg to Carswell Air Force Base in Texas. On board was a Mark IV atomic bomb, a huge 10-foot device bristling with nearly 5,000 pounds of high explosives. Per safety protocol, its plutonium pit was absent. Instead, an inert lead capsule sat ready in the bomb bay to be swapped out for the nuclear core only in flight if authorized. The crew understood the gravity of their mission. A successful drop would simulate an attack on the USSR, but the primary goal was to practice, to perfect procedures for its next major crisis. After nearly 7 hours into the Pacific crossing, trouble struck. Bitter cold at 12,000 feet had iced over the intakes and wings. Suddenly, 3 of the B-36's 6 Pratt Whitney Wasp major engines began to overspeed and erupt into flame. Warning horns blared in the cockpit. The pilot shut down the burning engines, but now only 3 propellers remained and they were already near maximum thrust. The giant bomber began losing altitude at over 500 feet per minute. The crew gripped the controls as the plane shuddered downward, half its power gone, the heavy fuel load pushing it earthward. Continuing the mission was out of the question. Something drastic had to be done. The crew made the only decision available. The bomber would jettison its bomb and head for land. Captain Harry Barrow radioed Strategic Air Command and guided the crippled Peacemaker far out over the Pacific dark to avoid populated areas. At roughly 8,000 feet, the bombardier armed the Mark IV device. The fuse was set for detonation around 4,600 feet. Thankfully, no plutonium core was installed. An empty dummy lead capsule had been pre-positioned in the bomb throughout the flight. Minutes later, just before midnight on February 13, 1950, the B-36's bomb doors opened. The massive bomb fell free into the dark ocean. Seconds after the drop, the ocean lit up. The crew saw a bright flash on the horizon and felt the distant thump of detonation. The 5,000-pound conventional explosive packed around the Mark IV's core detonated on impact. Had it been fully armed, the mid-air explosion of the bomb would have been equivalent to roughly 18 kilotons of TNT, about twice the force of the bomb that dropped on Hiroshima. As it was, a towering column of seawater and steam shot skyward in the darkness. A tremendous fireball blossomed above the surface, and the shock wave ripped through the air. Miles away, the flash was fleeting, a reminder of atomic power without radioactive terror. As the crew watched the column dissolve into stars, they silently acknowledged that the gamble had paid off. No nuclear blast, no radiation. They had done what they could to protect those below. Even after dumping the bomb, the Peacemaker couldn't maintain level flight. It was still going down. Captain Barry steered inland, seeking higher ground, but the descent rate remained unforgiving. Finally, at roughly 5,000 feet, the command came: abandon aircraft. In the pitch-black Pacific night, the crew strapped on parachutes and leapt into the stormy cold over Princess Royal Island in British Columbia. One by one, all 17 men jumped. Below them, the sea was a dark expanse, and the island's jagged shoreline was obscured by clouds. When the dust settled, 12 men, officers and airmen, had survived to float in life rafts. Tragically, 5 never emerged, including the weaponeer and 4 crewmen. They likely all fell into the icy ocean and succumbed before the rescue arrived. The crash triggered a massive rescue operation. Within minutes, Royal Canadian Air Force planes and ships converged on the area in Operation Bricks. Even in the freezing rain and snow, they combed the shoreline and timbered islands. By dawn, rescuers had found all 12 airmen who had landed on the island. Medical teams rushed them to safety. The joy of these survivors was tempered by sorrow. The 5 missing colleagues would never be found. Meanwhile, the battered B-36 had vanished. U.S. authorities assumed it had ditched into the open sea. However, initial search of the Pacific found no trace. Unbeknownst to all, the B-36 lay largely intact on a snow-covered mountainside. 3 years passed before the discovery. In 1958, a Canadian reconnaissance flight on an unrelated mission glanced down and spotted wreckage on Mount Colgate in British Columbia. Eager Air Force teams were sent in, but the brutal alpine terrain and the weather thwarted efforts. The following summer, a second U.S. Air Force party, aided by local guides, finally reached the site. What they found confirmed the crew's story. The Mark IV bomb was gone, the weapons bay door mangled by the demolition charges. Forensic engineers documented the wreck. The bomb shackle was undamaged by impact, and critically, no nuclear material was found in the debris. Even the inert lead capsule was retrieved as proof. After gathering intelligence and classified components, the team placed charges and destroyed what remained of the bomb bay. The survivors and their nation could finally breathe a collective sigh of relief. The U.S.'s first lost atomic weapon had caused only a conventional blast on an empty ocean. Every safety measure in place had functioned as intended. The nuclear core was never on board. The weaponeer had been present to arm the device properly. Procedures called for dumping the bomb over open water. In that dark Pacific night, disciplined professionalism saved countless lives on the ground. The sacrifice of the 5 crewmen who had perished was a grim reminder of how perilous early Cold War missions could be. Afterwards, the U.S. Air Force scrutinized the incident closely. Even though America held over 200 nuclear bombs to the Soviets' handful, commanders knew that one mistake could end in catastrophe. Policies were tightened, bomb designs incorporated more safeties, handling protocols were revised, and emergency procedures were drilled relentlessly. Over the decades, some 30 more broken arrows would occur worldwide, but lessons learned from this first event helped ensure no others caused a nuclear blast. The story of the 1950 B-36 crash, with the first ever loss of a nuclear weapon, lives on as a cautionary tale and a tribute. It stands as a stark chapter of the atomic age. Once more, human skill and protocol averted disaster, but at a heavy cost. In classrooms and museums, the Peacemaker's mission is taught as a case study in Cold War history and aviation safety. Today, tests of soil and snow on Mount Colgate show no radiation, only the enduring lessons that even routine operations carry huge stakes when nuclear arms are involved. As the decades have passed, pilots and engineers continue to live with the legacy of that night. Vigilance, caution, and respect for the awesome power they manage. The watchword remains that even in the quest for peace through strength, mistakes can still happen, and history demands that we learn every lesson. If you enjoyed this video and feel I've earned it, please consider subscribing and selecting the bell to get notified of future videos. If you'd like to see more of this type of content, a thumbs up and sharing this video would be very helpful. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.